name is Varshali. I am a family support service officer. I work with Down Syndrome Scotland. And we're here today to talk to you a little bit about Down syndrome awareness and supporting you through the journey that parents go through when they get a diagnosis of Down syndrome. So we are a parent-led charity. We've been established since 1982, and we're the only charity in Scotland that's dedicated solely to supporting people with Down syndrome and their carers. Now, the support we offer is all through life, and we have a dedicated policy campaigns team that works very closely with the government to influence the policy decisions to make sure that the society we live in reflects the needs of people with Down syndrome. So that's just a little bit of background on Down syndrome, Scotland. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit around the history of Down syndrome. So we know that there have been some Neolithic babies, a grave of a Neolithic baby that was found in that period. And it was a very well-preserved grave, very beautiful grave. So it goes to show us that that baby that was buried was really well loved. However, there have been paintings since depicted in the 1500s of people with Down syndrome, so people with similar physical features, characteristics. And it was in 1800s that there was a doctor called Dr. John Langdon Downes, and he studied some children in an institution near Twickenham, near London. He got very interested in these children because they displayed very similar physical features, characteristics, and it is after Dr. John Langdon Downes that Down syndrome is now named. However, it's only in 1939, there was a French professor called Professor Lejeune who established that Down syndrome is actually caused because of a genetic condition. So until then, we didn't know why it was caused. Obviously, it is a congenital condition, which means it happens at birth. It's not an illness. It's not a disease. It's not something you can take away. The reason I'm mentioning this is because often when parents get a diagnosis, that's sometimes one of the first questions they ask us. Is it something I've done during my pregnancy, which has caused me to have a baby with Down syndrome? So it's just to reiterate that it's nothing they have done. It is a purely random event. Now, there are 1 in 1,000 babies born worldwide with Down syndrome. And in Scotland, the number is roughly 60 to 70 babies born every year. And this is based on some of the data we've collected based on our membership and the referrals that we get. We know that Down syndrome is caused because of an extra chromosome on the 21st pair, but a lot of people don't know that there are different types of Down syndrome. So I'm going to talk to you about the different types of Down syndrome. So there are 3 types of Down syndrome. The first one, which you probably have heard the name, it's trisomy 21. So that's the most commonest form of Down syndrome. So imagine that these circles represent the cells in our body. And we all have 23 pairs of chromosomes or 46 chromosomes, one which comes from the father, one which comes from the mother. And the chromosomes always occur in pairs. So they're always in pairs like this. Now, every cell in our body has those 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now, when somebody has trisomy 21, what basically happens is on that 21st pair, you have a whole extra chromosome. So every cell in the body, the 21st pair has a whole extra chromosome. This extra chromosome is actually an excess protein, which the mom produces during pregnancy. It's called the amyloid protein. And it is this protein that gives some of those physical features that you see in somebody with Down syndrome, like the almond-shaped eyes or the shape of the face. So trisomy 21 is the commonest form of Down syndrome. The second type of Down syndrome is known as translocation. Now, again, you have your 23 pairs of chromosomes in all the cells of the body. Now, when somebody has translocation, what happens is on that 21st pair, you have a tiny bit of the chromosome which attaches itself to the 21st pair. So it could be on this side or it could be on the other side of the chromosome. So it's not a whole extra chromosome, but just a tiny bit. Now, translocation, in about 2/3 cases, you'll notice that either parent is a carrier of that extra gene. So it doesn't mean that the parent has Down syndrome. They're just carriers of the gene. So when cell division takes place, that little chromosome attaches itself to that 21st pair. Now, when somebody gets a diagnosis for translocation, they're usually offered further genetic testing because there's a high chance that they could possibly have babies. If they go on to have any more babies in the future, they could possibly also have Down syndrome. So that's the translocation type of Down syndrome. And the last one is known as mosaicism. So mosaicism is very, very rare, affects only about 1% of the population. And you have your 23 pairs of chromosomes again. Now, this one is quite similar to your trisomy 21. So on the 21st pair, you have that whole extra chromosome. The difference is it doesn't affect all the cells in the body. So some cells in the body continue to have the 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. Some cells will have 47 chromosomes. So they have that extra chromosome. So it's like a mosaic. And usually somebody with mosaicism may not display all the physical features or characteristics of somebody with trisomy or translocation. They will also have milder learning difficulties. So that's the 3 different types of Down syndrome. So back to the presentation. We talked about the different types of Down syndrome. Going to be busting a few myths now. The usual presentation that we do, we normally cover the health issues, characteristics, and learning profile. But obviously, if you want to access that, you can get in touch with us and we can deliver a special session for you guys. But today we're just going to talk a little bit more about a couple of myths. So one of the things is babies with Down syndrome are all born to older mothers. Now, you'll be surprised to know 80% of the children with Down syndrome are born to women under the age of 35. So the statistics is skewed towards older women because usually once the woman is 35, you get more tests offered. So the statistics sort of shows it's older women, but you could have an 18-year-old mom who could have a baby with Down syndrome. All people with Down syndrome are always happy and loving. So we always hear these sort of cliches. Now, people with Down syndrome experience a full range of emotions like all of us. In fact, sometimes they can be very sensitive to failure. So they do have those full range of emotions like everybody else. People with Down syndrome don't live as long as other people. Many people with Down syndrome live to over 60 years of age. Now, if you remember Dr. John Langdon Downs, when he studied those children in Twickenham, life expectancy was 9. So we have come a long, long way. There have been lots of medical advances and lots of support out there. So outcomes for people with Down syndrome are much more positive. The oldest person in the UK who has Down syndrome is 75 years old. Now, people with Down syndrome cannot read or write. You'll be surprised that reading is one of their biggest strengths because they're such visual learners and they learn by the whole word or the sight word approach. People with Down syndrome cannot hold down jobs. It's not people with Down syndrome who don't want to work, it's attitudes of people. So we have lots of young people who work in offices, cafes, shops, lots of different places. So it's the work opportunities that's a barrier to employment, not people with Down syndrome who don't want to work. Adults with Down syndrome are childlike. Well, they're not, and they should be treated age appropriately and should be taught age appropriate behaviors. So that's busting a few myths for you. Now, we did a survey. Charlotte and I sent out a questionnaire to a lot of our parent membership because, like I said to you before, we do deliver these talks to midwifery schools, we do talks to hospitals, and we wanted to find out what the experience was for people and parents, particularly when they got that diagnosis. So we sent out this questionnaire and we got lots of feedback from the parents, some very positive feedback, some not so positive. So I'm just going to share a couple of quotes with you. So one of the parents here said, the midwife said she had some pointers, but she's very beautiful and she's yours. She also came to see me 2 days later after the test confirmed Down syndrome. She was wonderful and I couldn't fault her. So very, very positive feedback here. One of the midwives really stood out in our aftercare after he was born, telling me how amazing he'll be, the sparkle in his eyes and focusing on all the good about it. In the first few long nights while still in hospital, overwhelmed at having this new life to look after alongside the unexpected diagnosis, he was a very much needed friend. So a very, very positive feedback here as well. Midwives on the postnatal ward were amazing. They let me and my partner stay in the private room for 7 nights post-birth. There was nothing physically wrong with me, but I think this was to allow time to process the situation, access the breastfeeding support. One day I returned to my room and a midwife had printed out "Welcome to Holland" and left it on my bed, which I thought was a lovely gesture. So really, really positive feedback here. Breastfeeding specialist midwife was fantastic and basically giving me one-to-one support nearly every day for 13 days that A spent in the unit. She told me there's no reason why she can't breastfeed, offered to put me in contact with other parents she knew who had children with Down syndrome. So really, really positive feedback, and that is what we want to strive for and achieve so that parents have that positive experience. However, some parents did tell us that their experience wasn't very positive. So I'm going to share some feedback, but I'm going to also tell you what parents would actually like to hear from you. So there was a parent who said that they were told, well, it's clear she's Downs. There are obvious dysmorphic features. So please be careful of the words you use. As parents, we do remember them. And this is with experience, I do know, and you'll hear from Charlotte how those words are so important and that parents remember them for the rest of their life. Low ears, less lines on hands, and when asked what that means, it could be a syndrome. We have seen some possible markers for Down syndrome would be better. So again, just being very mindful of the language that's used. Don't use medical jargon. Try and use language that people can understand. It's not too late to terminate. It's easily fixed, Parents should have the scope to change their mind, but not be pressured into doing so. Their decision should be accepted and respected at all times. So I have had one of these before. I'm sorry. Please don't say, I'm sorry, it's not your fault. Please congratulate us. They've just had a new baby. So celebrate that with them. So quickly, just a few pointers. Give yourself time to prepare. Use person-centered language. Interact with the baby. Use his or her name if you know that. Allow them plenty of time because we're bombarding them with so much information. Check that the parents have actually understood what it is that you're trying to tell them. And be realistic. Don't give those cliches and say, people with Down syndrome love to dance or they're always happy. Think of all the wide range of possibilities for people with Down syndrome and inform the family about support services that are available. So please do put them in touch with us. We have a fantastic pool of parent volunteers who can support your families. You must be aware that we circulate these baby packs, which go to all the maternity hospitals across Scotland. And you can come to our stall if you haven't seen one of these before. These should be given to all families if they've had a prenatal or postnatal diagnosis. I've also put some information on some really good breastfeeding resources because I know that is something that midwives will support families with. We also have a blog written by one of our mums. It's a fantastic one, her journey through breastfeeding, and some really good resources by PADS and Down's Heart Group if the baby's had a heart operation. So I'll be sharing these links as well, so you can, again, get access to that. Now, what do we offer? We have our family support team. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this, but our team is here to support, to give that counseling, emotional support that you need if you've had a baby on your caseload. We also, like I said, have a fantastic pool of parent volunteers who can support the families. We can help families with child disability benefit forms. So if the baby has a lot of health issues, they're in hospital and need that support, we can help with all those things. We run our own communication program called Achieving Better Communication, which runs from the ages of 0 to 21. We also have these free Macathon for Babies programs. So there's lots of information on our website, which you can pass on to families as well. Support for professionals. We do lots of these teaching sessions. So like I said, if you want the full teaching session, please do get in touch with us and we can offer it to your team. We do separate sessions for health visitors and separate session for consultants who are responsible for giving the diagnosis in hospitals. And we do sessions in schools. We do lots of training for schools as well. This is something we just created for all our health professionals, particularly midwives. It's a little insert which you can keep in your wallet or in your pocket, and just gives you a quick update on how you or things that you should be thinking of when you're going out to support families. So one, avoid using outdated language. Don't use cliches. Don't be predictive or say things like people with Down syndrome can do most things. Give parents time to think. And ask questions, and do put them in touch with us, because sometimes parents tell us that is one of the biggest things that they find support in, is speaking to another parent. So do get in touch with us for that. And the people first language, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but just remember it's always the baby first or the child first, and then they happen to have a syndrome. So it's always Jack has Down syndrome, Emily has Down syndrome. It's not a Down's child or a Down's baby. So I'm going to quickly share this video with you, which is much more powerful than me telling you about the language to use.
I care about words.
Because words matter.
Words have power.
Words can build or destroy.
Help or hurt.
Don't call me Mongo.
Or monk.
Never ever say that.
Never, ever.
Don't call me that.
Don't call me spaz or retard.
Or that words.
These words hurt me.
These words are wrong.
Don't call me a Downs person or say he's Downs.
Down syndrome is not a disease. It's a genetic condition.
I am not ill, handicapped, or suffering.
Down syndrome is a small part of who I am. There's so much more to me.
I am a son,
A workaholic, a waitress,
a brother,
And a dancer. Call me Teresa.
Stuart,
Cher, Sam,
I'm a friend.
an actor,
a writer,
an ambassador for Down syndrome.
and I'm a Harry Potter fan.
Words matter.
Mind your language.
Think about what you're saying. See beyond my Down syndrome.
So if you have any questions for me, we have a stall and you can come and ask us or come and meet us there, because I know we've been given a short amount of time, but I want you to hear from our parent speaker, Charlotte, as well. So any questions, please do come to our stall. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte and I am very lucky because I have a very funny, kind, wonderful daughter called Tandy who just happens to have Down syndrome. So I'm going to tell you just a quick bit about our journey through pregnancy. So when I was pregnant with Tandy, we were doing some of our screening in Scotland and some in France, because at the time my husband was working in ski schools out there. We did our initial screening in Scotland because we knew that was where we were going to have her. We wanted to make sure we had all the proper screening done here. We had our cubs test done. We weren't told very much about it other than it gave us our risk of having a child with Down syndrome. It all sounded very routine, so we agreed and had it done, and it came back as a 1 in 2,600 chance of having a child with Down syndrome. To be honest, we didn't give it another thought. We went back to France and continued with our regular midwife checks, and then came back to Scotland for our next scan, which all went really well. Nothing was found, and we went back to France feeling really happy. Saw our midwife for a check, and they said, well, I think they've missed some measurements, which didn't really surprise me. The French like to do things very much their way. So we agreed to have another scan done without being concerned. And we just thought it was another nice excuse to see the baby, to be honest. At this point, I should probably explain that I used to work as a translator, and I'm also a vet. So I'm fluent in French, so I could understand what the ultrasonographer was saying as he was scanning us. And he was starting to mutter kind of under his breath about the fact that the long bones were coming up a bit short and that her nose bone wasn't particularly obvious. So I could understand this, but I didn't know what the meaning of it was. So he sat us down at that point and explained that he felt that the baby was showing signs of Down syndrome. And as you can imagine, we felt like a truck had hit us. We had no idea that this was happening in any sense. We'd never had any inkling from anything else before. He then explained, to try and reassure us, that in France you can terminate up until the day before your due date, which obviously was no reassurance whatsoever. We were referred to a consultant in the hospital next door to go and have another scan done, which we did, unfortunately, because she turned out to be the most unpleasant person I've ever met. She quite happily scanned and said, yes, I think your baby's got Down syndrome. So what we'll do is amniocentesis, and then we'll book you in for a termination. There was absolutely no discussion about what I wanted to do, and certainly keeping the baby was not on the cards. We rang our midwifery team back in Scotland and let them know what was going on. They said, come home, come and chat to us. And we honestly couldn't leave France quick enough. We felt like I was carrying some sort of disease that they needed to eradicate. We got back to Scotland and everybody was so kind and caring and compassionate. They did another scan and the bones were indeed coming up slightly short. Although my consultant at the time felt that because I had such a low chance on the cubs, that it was much more likely that she had dwarfism. So I'm sure you can imagine by this point our brains are about ready to explode, and we decided that we would actually go and pay and have a harmony test done, because we just needed to know one way or another what was happening. We had to then return to France for my husband's work, unfortunately, meaning that when I did get the results at 5:30 on a Friday evening from the doctor, his first words to us were, I'm so sorry, it's turned out that your baby does have a high risk of having Down syndrome. And our world completely fell apart. The attitude of so many health professionals towards Down syndrome, that being pushed towards termination, we felt like that was going to be our only option, and it was just absolutely heartbreaking. We felt like this life that we thought we were going to have, this perfect family life, had just been ripped apart, and we were devastated. And unfortunately, being 5:30 on a Friday, it meant that we weren't able to call anybody for support. Everywhere was shut. leaving us to Google, unfortunately, finding awful lists of medical conditions that a child with Down syndrome could have. There was so little that we could find on what life was really like with a baby with Down syndrome. Fortunately, my mum, being an educational psychologist, put us in touch with a lady that she'd worked with in the past who was actually a paediatric nurse, and she had a son with Down syndrome. And speaking to her was just like a breath of fresh air. She let us know exactly what life was like with Harrison, and dispelled all those myths and made us realize that yes, we would have challenges like with every other child, but it was a life that we wanted. And for the first time in what felt like weeks, we were really excited about our baby again. We rang our consultant in Scotland and let her know that we'd made the positive decision to continue with our pregnancy. And she said, I'm so pleased, because in my mind, Down syndrome isn't a good enough reason to terminate a wanted pregnancy. And it was like music to our ears. It's stuck with us ever since. We felt very lucky that we found out early, because it gave us loads of opportunities to ask loads of questions, learn Makaton. And when she did arrive, we could just celebrate. We were sent to the fetal medicine to have a check, just to make sure everything was fine and we were prepared for anything before she was born. The consultant was amazing. She did an incredible scan, spent ages checking everything, almost so much that we started to be quite frightened that she'd found something. She went off with this enormous ream of paper and said, I'm just going to do some measurements. I'll come and see you in a moment. And we got ushered through to a room called Counselling Room A, where there were chairs and a table and flowers and a box of tissues, at which point we thought, oh, this is just going to be the worst news ever. She came back in with a nurse, and again we thought, well, this is definitely awful news, but actually it just turned out that that was the way that they give information, and absolutely everything was completely fine. Tansy was in a real hurry to come into the world. She arrived at 37+5 after 3.5 hours of labour. We'd informed our delivery team that she most likely had Down syndrome and that we were completely fine with that. They weren't completely convinced when she arrived. She had an AGPAR score of 9. She was really strong, really bright, and they weren't convinced. There were no really obvious features apart from very slightly almond eyes. They did the blood test anyway, and we waited for the results to come back for that. And when the consultant came in to tell us, it was odd. She'd known us for a couple of days by this point, and she'd been in chatting to us and hugging Tansy, but she still walked in with her head held low and her shoulders slumped forward, as though it was her automatic reaction that this was such bad news. She felt that she would have to really be, act very sad, which was strange. And I'm glad that we knew before, because that was certainly not the way I would have wanted to know for the first time. So life with Tansy now. She's now 6. She's in primary 2 in mainstream school. She grew up using Makaton, but she actually now says so much that she uses Makaton very little. She's much more vocal, which is fantastic, but we do still use Makaton occasionally if we just need to get her to calm down and listen to what we're saying. She's exceptionally busy, very active. She has a younger brother, and the two of them are complete idiots and run around together doing things that just terrify me. Nothing stops her. She is unbelievably empathetic and so kind, non-judgmental. She honestly teaches us so much about the way that we should be treating other people, and we learn so much from her. She's honestly taught us so much in her 6 years of life. She'll continue to teach us more than we ever teach her. She also loves nature. She will spend hours sitting on the floor looking at bugs and leaves, and dog walks can take hours, but to be honest, you and my husband and I rush around so much that having a child that slows us down is a real gift. A fellow parent volunteer often says that you get the child that you need, not the child you want, and Tansy was definitely the child we need. We found that when Tansy was born, healthcare professionals were very quick to tell us what they felt that she couldn't do, and to be honest, it was like red rag to a bull to my husband and I. And one of the first things they decided to tell us was that she'd probably never be able to ride a bike. So we went on a bit of a mission to make sure that she would be able to do that. But she's actually a lot better now. And being a ski instructor, my husband was obviously very keen that our children would ski, and they got started on skis quite early, and she absolutely loves it. She's a complete natural. And so last winter we spent quite a lot of time up at Glenshee teaching them both to ski. I think being so laid back and relaxed, she has just taken to it like a duck to water. She just relaxes so much on her skis. It's brilliant. So we're very lucky. We do have a lot of support, both through Down Syndrome Scotland and through the NHS. So with our NHS, we have a community paediatrician and a community paediatric nurse who are just incredible sources of support, particularly our paediatric nurse. She was amazing at helping us through toilet training and comes and does her yearly thyroid check. We also have speech and language therapy who check her 3 to 4 times a year just to help us ensure that we're always giving her the best support we can and encouraging as much language and vocabulary as possible. She used to see a physiotherapist. Actually, she doesn't anymore. She's been discharged, and to be honest, she never really needed to. It was me just being a worrying parent and wanting to make sure that she had everything I thought she might need. But yeah, she's been discharged from them recently. She's also been discharged from audiology, who she used to see on an annual basis, but she's never had any problems with her hearing whatsoever. She does see her ophthalmologist quite regularly because she does wear glasses, but they're a very temporary measure because she has a problem with her eyes. It's very similar for all children, and they're just trying to make sure that it corrects quickly with her. Down Syndrome Scotland have been the most incredible support for us. Varshali's been with us right from the very beginning. She has helped us with transitions into nursery, transitions into primary. She comes to all of our child plan meetings, and she's just an amazing support on the end of the phone. Also, Down Syndrome Scotland now run amazing workshops, meaning that we can learn so much about helping her with her development and communication. We also have been doing ABC with Tandy since she was a tiny baby, and that weekly lesson has just been an amazing resource both for us and for the school who do it with her every week, and she learns so much from it. We're also very lucky we have a family within our very small village who also has a son with Down syndrome, and that's a huge support for us. Just on days when you have to do something miserable like fill in a disability living allowance form, being able to go and see them, explain what you've just done and have a hug without really having to explain why it's really awful is a real joy. So I just wanted to go over the use of language. We didn't really think about language much when we first became pregnant with Tandy, but we then realized that the language was so important. Risk was the first thing that was ever told to us, the risk of having a child with Down syndrome. And if you look at the definition of risk, a situation involving exposure to danger, the possibility that something unpleasant or unwelcome will happen, or a person or a thing regarded as a threat or a likely source of danger, you can see how completely out of place risk is with that definition. Using chance, something much more positive, would be so much nicer. You have a chance of winning the lottery, you don't have a risk. We were exposed to so many negatively emotive words, and they really stuck with us. We used to go home and think about everything that the midwives had said, that the consultants had said. We would analyze them, we'd pull them apart, we'd try to find any positive aspect within them. And those words, as Varshali said, really do stick with you forever, and they're so upsetting. I do feel that if our health professionals had used much more positive words, I do feel that it would have changed our feelings about how the diagnosis when we did have it. I think if they'd have said, you know, the chance of having a child with Down syndrome, it really just doesn't sound half as bad. Varshali and I are on a small personal mission to try and make sure that healthcare professionals never say risk again. So in conclusion, what would we change? Absolutely nothing. Other than some of the parts of our prenatal journey with Tandy, we wouldn't change a thing. We're so lucky to have her, and she is just the most amazing part of our family. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate.